Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. I am John Schmeelk. Thank you for joining us right here in the Giants podcast studio presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. Our guest today is Gregg Rosenthal from NFL.com. And now we welcome our guest. He is Gregg Rosenthal, NFL Network, NFL.com. You can find him on the NFL Daily podcast and all your favorite podcast platforms. Also, the free agency half of the 40 and free agency podcast with Daniel Jeremiah. And when free agency kicks off next week on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, you can find them on all NFL Fast programs, channels, and platforms, and the NFL YouTube channel at 7 p.m. Gregg, welcome to the Giants Huddle podcast, man. How are you?
I am good. This is my time of year. Like everything we're going to be analyzing and talking about for the next 5 months basically happens in the next 10 or 12 days.
Yeah, and, you know, baseball free agency is kind of like a trickle. NFL free agency is a tidal wave. You're going to have 2 or 3 days, and you're going to get hammered by the tidal wave. And you can check out Gregg's list on NFL.com. He puts together a great job, the top 101 free agents. So let's start there. Give me the 20,000-foot view of this free agency class. What is it? How should fans think about it? And how do you think this is going to look when it all kicks off next Monday?
Not a ton of huge names. And in general, I would say like the top 30 or 40, like it's not as many difference makers as you maybe would hope. But one thing I really took away doing this exercise, I thought it was a deeper free agent group than maybe any I've ever done. I've been doing this for 13, 14 years. The quality of the players that I left off the list, I thought was better than in any previous year. I think that's because of more short-term contracts. There's a lot of guys who are signing 1-2 year deals, maxes, going back into free agency over and over. So a lot of guys that will help your team, not big names that are going to get you 600 snaps and ultimately play better than half the, round one or certainly round 2, round 3 rookies that come into the league and actually help your team. But like not a lot of stars, but I actually do think it's a lot of depth at a lot of the non-premium positions.
So that's where I was going to go next. What positions do you think you're going to find the most depth?
Okay, so running back is great in free agency. I think tight ends is really good in free agency. I actually do think edge is good, so that would probably be the one position where, again, you can find top-level guys, you can find some promising mid-level guys off their rookie contracts, and then you can find a lot of guys who kind of fill that role that I talked about earlier, 500, 600 good snaps for you. So edge is pretty good, and then safety's awesome too. I actually think there's more legit plus starters at safety where it's not just you're guiding a guy to fill a hole, but they're actually good starters and guys that might not make a ton of money but can help your team out in free agency.
Where might it be a little bit light? If you need somebody, you might go down the shopping aisle and the shelves are a little bit empty.
Well, it's no surprise that quarterback, tackle, it's really brutal. There's almost no tackles available, offensive tackles. Defensive tackles, and this is different than most years, there's just not many beyond kind of those rotational guys that I was talking about. So that's a position that I think is really thin. Those are the ones that stand out to me. And receiver, maybe not as deep as normal. Normally, I feel like there's a lot of different flavors at receiver. I like 5 or 6 guys, including one of your guys, Wan'Dale Robinson, that are out there, but not the depth at the position that normally I would see.
Yeah, so I'll get to the Giants individuals in a second, but it's funny, and my notes were the same on the class. I think we're pretty much in agreement in terms of where the strengths and weaknesses are, and I think it's a weird year because a lot of the strengths of the free agency class actually matches the strengths of the draft class, which is not what you want generally if you're an NFL decision maker.
That's absolutely right. We literally just finished taping an episode, the 40s and free agents you mentioned with Daniel Jeremiah, and that's kind of how we approach this post-combine, like which positions were better in free agency, were worse in free agency. And for instance, I think the lack of tackles is going to help push up the draft prospects, the lack of tackles in free agency, whereas, there's a decent amount of guards in free agency, and you're absolutely right. I think it matches up pretty similarly where there's some good safeties, there's some good linebackers. Receiver might be a spot where you like it better in the draft than you do in free agency.
No, I agree with you on that 100%. As of this recording, now I was just recording something else live, so maybe I missed something. This is going to air a little bit later in the week. We have Pickens has been franchised, right?
Yes.
We have Kyle Pitts has been franchised. The Jets say they're going to put some type of tag on Breece Hall. That has not
he's
happened yet.
Franchise tag, yeah. He's getting tagged, yeah.
Yes,
franchise
whether
tag.
it's transition or franchise, whatever. We're about an hour from the deadline. Do you expect Pierce to go off the board? Anyone else that you're keeping an eye on in terms of the tags?
Yeah, it is tricky because this will be old news, but I think Daniel Jones will get tagged if they can't get a deal. I think this is coming down to the wire that either way, him and Alec Pierce, I believe, are going to stay with the Colts. So it's very similar to the Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley situation from a few years ago. Just replace Barkley with Alec Pierce. But either way, I think the team wants to keep them both.
So it's funny. When I had my office on the other side of the building, around this exact time, 2023, I guess it was, right? I walk out of my room and I see Joe Shane walk out of one of the meeting rooms where they're meeting with like Barkley's and DJ's agents, and he's on the phone all stressed out, like trying to figure out what to do. And when you say that went down to the wire, that went down to the absolute wire. And Daniel Jones has a really good habit of having good seasons when he's heading into free agency, huh? He has quite the knack for that.
Not only that, but he has an injury complicating things very often, too. And this is a really serious injury that I think is tricky. They're going to have to figure out a long-term deal. The transition tag, which is what I hear would be the case for him, because I don't think they think any other team is going to step in and try to sign him for that big of a. It's just too big, but it is complicated considering how well he was playing, but also what a serious injury that is. Ultimately, there's only so many quarterbacks out there. The Colts really like his marriage with Shane Steichen, so I'm not really sweating the details. I'm sure Colts fans are. I just think they're going to find a way to get it done.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he makes it back, which is kind of similar to the situation that the Giants were with Daniel Jones a few years ago. It's unbelievable how similar the two situations are. Who are the guys you're watching when free agency starts that need to get signed before teams start moving on other guys? You know, there's always like 2 or 3 guys that, all right, well, we're waiting on this guy. We're not going to go sign the guy in tier 2 until we know about this tier 1 guy first. Who do you think are the big fish in the pond that have to go first before everything else starts happening?
Well, the edge market really stands out to me because I think Jalen Phillips is a real deal, top of the market type of guy. Reminds me a little bit of where Milton Williams was, also from the Eagles last year. And I think him and Trey Hendrickson are interesting because I think Hendrickson maybe gets less long-term money because he's a little older. But I think those two guys, and then Odafe Owe, and I would even throw Boye Mafe from the Seahawks into that crew. I just think some people would maybe throw Kwity Paye from the Colts also in that group. I wouldn't, but I think those 4 guys specifically, maybe roughly in that order, are going to get pegged off before you get to the mercenaries like Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, or maybe the second tier of guys, which I would include Arnold Ebiketie as a guy who I like, Joseph Asai from the Bengals. But I think they have to wait till the top of the market. To me, that market is very clear, and you mentioned how it's a tidal wave. I just don't expect to wait super long on most of those guys. Hendrickson could be one where maybe he doesn't see the value. It's not all matching up right away where it takes a couple days. Sometimes you see that with the older guys.
Huddle up, get in here. If you're lined up here, you gotta go over the middle with it to score.
Right. How do we make that happen?
I don't know, but Citizens does. Make sense of your money with Citizens, official bank of Eli Manning.
Giants Huddle Podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day celebrations to your everyday financial needs, Big Blue fans can get the most out of every moment with Citizens. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. Yeah, there's a lot of end of the first round, top of the second round guys that are coming off their rookie deals. You know, the Maffes, the Ebiketties that I think teams will have to make some tough decisions on. What do you think's going to happen with Hendrickson? I don't think the Bengals are going to try to extend this relationship. I think that's too tricky, given everything that's happened there. Do you think 2-year deal? Can he get a 3rd year out of a team? What do you think that's going to look like?
I think in terms of guaranteed money, it'll be a 2-year deal, whether they tack on another year, even if it's a year and a half guaranteed. I think he'll be good enough. He'll get really good money for those first 2 years, but he's going to be 32 years old. He's coming off of an injury. It's a tricky one, too, kind of like Daniel Jones, because you know, he wasn't as good last year, but literally the year before he finished second in Defensive Player of the Year. So, you know, he's only going to take so much of a discount. There are plenty of teams out there that could use kind of a get over the top type of player, whether it's the Bucks, the Bills. I can think of a lot of them, and there's plenty of cap space out there to make him happy.
We'll see if Jerry Jones keeps up on the promise of trying to spend more in free agency. That could be a fit there, too. All right, Alec Pierce, we'll see if the Colts end up retaining him. Either way, he's going to be top of the market. I think his average yearly thing is probably minimum of what the franchise tag is. What Pickens got, probably around 27, right? It could go higher than that, you think?
Yeah, I think that's about right. Maybe if he re-signs with the Colts, it ends up a little below that, but he's going to get paid as a real deal starter. I mean, his numbers are crazy. He's putting up 1970s numbers where it's like 39 catches for 1,000 yards. Like, you just don't see that sort of yards per catch, and his speed travels. And the Colts are the most, fascinating team to me in that division because they have some cap issues. They're trying to reshape their defense. There's a lot going on there. And so I do wonder how they're going to fit it all. Could they possibly trade a Michael Pittman? We had him on our show, NFL Daily, and he wasn't sure about his future. He has 1 year left on his contract. So they're a team there's a handful of these teams out there that I just think are going to be active in the trade market, and they could be one of those teams.
Well, let's go there before we get to the Giants specifically. Who should we be keeping an eye on in terms of trades? Maybe targeting guys at some of these positions of weakness. We just saw the Browns do that, right? Trading for Titus Howard, then giving him a monster extension. You saw the Jets acquiring a nose tackle, maybe thinking, I don't know if we're going to find one elsewhere when they traded Jermaine Johnson for Devondre Sweat. Who are the guys we should be keeping an eye on in terms of the trade market over the next few days?
Titans have so much cap space, but among the best teams, the Chargers have a lot of flexibility. I think that the Eagles and the Chiefs are going to be active. Now, they could be, the Chiefs specifically, sending players out. I think the Eagles are going to be kind of a revolving door where they make a big change this offseason in terms of some of their big players. They're going to wave goodbye to some free agents. I think they could have trades. Obviously, A.J. Brown has been talked about. And then Minnesota is another team that really stands out to me. Jonathan Grenard is a player that could get traded. I think they'll have some pretty high-profile cuts. We already know about Aaron Jones and Javon Hargrave. But who's another one? TJ Hawkinson there is another guy that could go out. And so they're a team that has legit cap issues. The salary cap can always be finessed, but I think they're going to look at this year in this offseason as kind of not a rebuilding year, but just a remodeling where their team comes back quite different than they are right now.
Just want to have two wide receivers in the NFC East as it affects the Giants. Any chance that Pickens gets traded for a pick if they can't come to a long-term deal? I know the Cowboys just love doing this through August to keep us all interested. Right. And then I don't know how the Eagles figure out the cap situation with A.J. Brown. They're up against it as it is, and the dead money on his deal. I just don't know if they can. I know Howie's a genius. He can figure all this stuff out. I get it. But I don't know how they figure out a way to move him given the salary cap ramifications of it.
Yeah, the Saints get a lot of attention for all the void years and all the cap sort of massaging that they do, but no one has attacked this void market like Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie, their owner. And that really speaks to the amount of money that they're willing to spend, like an actual cash, and it helps them. It really does make a difference. All that said, I agree with you. They would, I think, have to get a bigger offer than they're probably going to get for A.J. Brown to actually make it make sense before June 1st. And this is something where we're getting in the weeds with the rules, but you can make a post-June 1st cut before June 1st and just call it that. You can't do that with a trade. So he could be someone that we're talking about this into August, and we just see how that plays out. Now, for the Eagles, it would have to be a veteran that you get back after June 1st, because, like, why are you trading for a draft pick after June 1st? They're trying to win the Super Bowl. And so I think Howie was telling the truth that we're not going to get better trading A.J. Brown. It would take a big offer. Maybe it's out there. Maybe there is a first and a player out there for A.J. Brown, but I kind of doubt it right now.
Do you see teams being a little bit more aggressive with the void years now, trying to follow that pattern with some of these teams as they, because the cap goes up every year, right? So if you push the money down, the money doesn't hurt you as much as the cap expands, right? Do you think more teams are going to try to start to do that? And I even look at the Giants too, right? They got John Harbaugh here. They're not trying to do a long-term rebuild. They're trying to win pretty quickly.
Yes, and to get into some real nitty-gritty, I look at the teams that have taken some outside investments, like selling a portion of the team. I think that was a big deal for the Eagles, for instance, a couple years ago, of like selling 10% of the team, and you get this cash infusion. And those are the types of teams that are starting to push these void years. So to answer your question, yes, I mean, a lot of the league is doing this, and then there's some old school teams that don't. The Cowboys actually are not a team that has done it. The Giants in the past have traditionally not been a team that does it. The Chiefs are still kind of doing the old model where they're just restructuring players and getting changing the cap that way. It's a little trickier to do it that way, and that's why I mentioned the Chiefs specifically as a team that I think could be trading maybe some surprising veterans like a Trent McDuffie. Wouldn't surprise me if he ends up going out this offseason.
Yeah, we just saw the Cowboys do that with Lamb, Tyler Smith, and Prescott, right? And now the Giants, they don't have a lot of cap space. So if they want to create it, they might have to do that with the Brian Burnses of the world, the Dexter Lawrence of the world, guys like that. So we'll see what the Giants end up doing. So let's get to the Giants players specifically here, Greg. Let's start the wide receiver position. As you mentioned this, if Pierce either signs quickly or gets retained by the Colts, Wan'Dale is right in that next tier of wide receivers. What do you think we're looking at in terms of market? How hungry your team's going to be for those guys, given it is a very deep wide receiver class in the draft? What do you think that wide receiver market's going to look like?
Yeah, for a guy like Wan'Dale and Romeo Doubs, and I would throw Rashid Shaheed maybe at the top of this tier. Mike Evans is a different category, but also very interesting. Look, I think, Wan'Dale is interesting because of the size and speed. You're not sure how teams are going to view him, but that's probably a $15 million a year player minimum with plenty of guarantees. Maybe the first 2 years are guaranteed. I think your former coach, Brian Dable, has already been connected to him pretty strongly in Tennessee. And I think if you're a team like the Titans, you look at it as like, we need 3 weapons. All right, here's one where we know what we're getting, and if we have to quote unquote overpay, that's how the market goes. So I think about Christian Kirk a few years ago getting $17 million a year. Like Wan'Dale Robinson ultimately is probably getting that plus.
No, I agree with you, and I think then the problem you're into with the Giants, and I wonder how you would just think about this strategy-wise. You don't know about Malik Neighbors with the injury, right? I think that's kind of really the ultimate thing that nobody knows except, and really even the Giants medical staff doesn't know in March what he's going to look like in August or September. If you can't match that dollar amount Robinson gets, where can you go to make sure you're not sitting there with some gaping hole at wide receiver with a second-year quarterback trying to make sure Dart plays well in a second year in a new system? I don't know if there's a clear answer there other than just saying, all right, well, I'm going to plug a second-round wide receiver in there, which, as you know, it's very tough to really depend on rookies, especially early in years.
Yeah, now, I said there's not depth. There are guys like Juwan Jennings. Jalen Naylor from the Vikings is an interesting kind of mid-level guy. But those are the types of players you're talking about. Kendrick Bourne, guys who are just kind of filling a gap, not a long-term solution. I think the more exciting angle would certainly be via trade. So Jordan Addison is a name that's been thrown out. Could the Vikings possibly trade him? I don't think Jalen Waddle is going to be available from the Dolphins, but there's always a few surprises. DJ Moore from the Bears is a player I absolutely think will be available. So it's not just the free agency market. It could be potentially a trade.
No, I think those are some good names. All right, let's go to the offensive line. We talked about offensive tackle. I mean, there is just nobody there. Rasheed Walker is probably the number one guy. He's a left tackle. Then you get into a bunch of guys that you have questions about. And Jermaine Illuminor, I think, is probably right at the top of that list. And we saw last year, I wrote him down so I had him in front of me. Dan Moore got a 4-year, $82 million contract. Jalen Moore got a 2-year, $15 million contract. He wasn't even a starter when he got signed to that contract by the Chiefs. So I imagine this offensive tackle market is probably going to be very aggressive.
Yeah, it's really Illuminor. Braden Smith is a right tackle from the Colts who, thought about retirement a couple of years ago and has a neck injury. So those are some pretty big red flags, but his tape is good. And Juwan Taylor is now available, who played a lot for the Chiefs, was overpaid by them, but he'll get a job. And that's like it for starting level guys in terms of just locked in. And so Illuminor, I don't think is a guy that the rest of the league is going to view as highly as I do, and maybe even Giants fans do, because to me, he played really well. He's not a traits guy, not necessarily like a dynamic guy in the running game, but he can pass protect. He's had a good career, and so I don't think he'll quite get Dan Moore money because of his age, but he's going to get a starting job, and it'll be a really great success story for a guy, as you guys know, who has bounced around a little, found a home with the Giants, and it'll be, I think, his best contract that he's received as a pro.
If you want to know how to manage 2 minutes of crunch time football, I'm your man. But if you're wondering about a long-term financial plan, you should talk to Citizens. Hey, I can also talk lawn care.
I'd like to learn about a mowing routine.
Yes, I knew I could help. Make sense of your money with Citizens.
Yeah, and look, he has to take advantage. He's 31. This is like the one chance for him to really cash in here. So he's got to do it. And I guess then my question is that I guess the Giants then they go to Marcus Bowe because to your point, you mentioned wide receiver. You can always find wide receivers. Offensive tackle, it's not that. And the Giants finally put together a pretty good unit last year on the offensive line. They played fairly well. If you let Illuminor walk, Greg Van Roten, their starting right guard, we'll see what his situation ends up being. I think then putting together a good offensive line becomes really, really hard.
It does, and it just speaks to how important the coaching is going to be. The offensive line coach, obviously, who they believe in, and Matt Nagy, that it just means so much. And I'm with you. I had that take even going back to 2024, before Andrew Thomas was hurt. I was like, actually, the Giants finally have a pretty good offensive line, good enough. And last year, I think they got even better, obviously, because you had a healthy Andrew Thomas. And you need that more than anything. And that's where you're counting on coaching and the help that John Harbaugh will have, and obviously Joe Shane here, and finding the right players. I look at what Buffalo did a few years ago. If you think about the top of the guard market right now, it's David Edwards and the center is Connor McGovern. Those were guys that were kind of afterthoughts in free agency that they picked up from other teams. One was even very late in free agency, like at the end of the summer, and turned into guys who are now going to get paid $20 million or something like that. And so it's always like you're crossing your fingers, but offensive line especially, I always think about it like bullpens in baseball. Like you just don't know until it happens, and yet it's going to make or break your team and coaching and just it all coming together. It's everything, and you're right. You're probably not going to be. It's not going to be like names that you look at and that you're going to be thinking this is a great group going into the year, most likely.
Yeah, and unfortunately, unlike baseball, you can't just bring up some kid from AA that's a starter, convert him into a reliever, he throws 98, and you put him in there for 2 innings every couple days. Two other positions I want to hit on you with. Guard. You mentioned that the Giants could have a hole at right guard, trying to figure out what they're going to do there. How deep is that guard market if you're looking for somebody that maybe is kind of like a middle of the road? You're spending, $8-9 million on the player, and he can give you solid production as a guard.
Yeah, I think it's definitely deeper. There's guys who are going to get paid a lot of money, like Zion Johnson from the Chargers, David Edwards I mentioned from the Bills. I heard he's going to get a lot. Isaac Seumalo from the Steelers might get a decent amount. But then there's other guys who can just help you. Kevin Zeitler, who's a veteran out there. Sean Ryan from the Packers. You got some Browns in the mix, like Wyatt Teller and Batonio. There are players. Van Roten is kind of lower on that list, but just guys that I think you can find. And so that's where your front office, your pro personnel department's got to stand out and make sure you find the right fit, maybe the right connection with the coaches that you have. But I do think you can find at least one solid starting guard without kind of blowing out your budget.
All right, couple more. Linebacker, Bobby Okereke, there are reports that the Giants might move on from him. We'll see if they actually do. Micah McFadden's a free agent, which means the Giants don't have any starting inside linebackers. What do you think of the off-ball linebacking crew in terms of what's available? Obviously, Devin Lloyd's going to be at the top of that market.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see his market. I really like him. I think there's a few teams that really like him. I think there's varying opinions on him, so we'll see how high he goes. But Nakobe Dean is a guy teams are excited about. Leo Chanel from the Chiefs is another guy. And then I think what the Giants could do here, at least for one of their spots, is there's a lot of solid veteran players out there. And Alex Anzalone, a Demario Davis, even an Alex Singleton, Eric Wilson from the Vikings, Matt Milano from the Bills. There are names there. I think that's where it matches up pretty well. So if you can draft a linebacker maybe in the middle rounds, find a off-ball linebacker, whether it's at the top of the market or not, it usually doesn't cost as much at that position. I think free agency is a good spot to find those guys.
And maybe Sonny Styles is there at number 5. Who knows? That could always be an option too. Corner. You had Cordell Flott pretty high on your list, and I loved your caption. Cordell Flott gave us no choice but to put him this high on our list because he just played too well. I loved that. I thought it was hilarious because I think you're right. And this is not a great corner group in free agency either, at least in my opinion. I mean, could he be looking at 12 to 15, 10 to 13, somewhere in that area?
Yeah, I do think he's going to get over $10 million a year. There's a handful of the younger guys. That's who teams want to pay. So Alante Taylor is another name, probably above him a little bit. Buster Brown, Monteric Brown from the Jaguars, maybe a name a little bit below him from what I've heard around the league. And then it's kind of pick your flavor. But if you have a guy who's played a lot, he earned his way into that job and onto my list, like I mentioned, there's not that many big names. Jalen Watson from the Chiefs will get paid decent money. Jamel Dean is a little older, but he'll get a decent contract from the Bucs. And then after that, Flott is in that mix. I heard his name a lot in Indianapolis. I think that's all you need is 2 or 3 teams to be like, yeah, we would play him 1,000 snaps. And I think he earned that last year. I think it surprised the Giants maybe a little bit. It surprised me too, but he had a really nice season.
A lot of noise that the Giants might be in on the running back group. You mentioned it's very deep. If you don't want to go high, if you don't want to spend big, and we know Kenneth Walker is going to be on the top of that list. Breece Hall, as you mentioned, probably not going to end up being available. Travis Etienne's in that mix. There's some guys down the list, like Kenneth Gainwell's out there. Who are some of the guys that you think could be good value gets at that position this offseason?
I love Gainwell. I like Rashad White. I'm trying to think of who matches up well with Cam Scadaboo already being there, because Tyler Algier does not to me. He's almost a similar sort of do everything, really rugged, tough runner, but I think he's going to get a better contract than people think. Rashad White, I think, would be a fun one. To me, he came up out of the draft as a receiver, and he is dynamic in pass protection and catching the ball. And I think that's what Kenneth Gainwell can do too. I mean, his Steelers teammates voted Kenneth Gainwell the team MVP last year, which maybe says a lot about the Steelers. But some of those kind of secondary running backs, you need 2. You guys have 1. He's coming off an injury, so it does make sense to me that they would be in the market for 1.
All right, and final question. How do you think John Harbaugh is going to want to approach this in conjunction with Joe Schoen in terms of free agency? How quickly he's going to want to move? We've seen when head coaches in the past have had heavy influence on free agency decisions. A lot of times teams are very aggressive. So what do you think John Harbaugh's kind of just general approach is going to be to free agency in his first year in the Giants?
Yeah, I think it's going to be aggressive. You look at the success of first-year head coaches lately, including with his brother, who had a good first season with the Chargers. You have a lot of familiarity with Harbaugh, with some of these players around the league, because he's coached for so long. His assistants, who aren't all coming from Baltimore, have familiarity with these players, and that's when you feel like at your most confident. So I think they're not going to take a Commanders approach where it's really betting on the old guys, but I think it'll be somewhere between that and being patient, where, yeah, I think they're going to look to fill a lot of holes while they establish their core players of young players in the Harbaugh era. Because why not? Like, they have some really good high-level players. It's one of the reasons I think John Harbaugh was excited about the Giants job versus a couple of the ones out there, that they have some good high-level players that make you think you can compete right away.
Do you think they can do enough so that they're in that, in the hunt graphic when you get to the middle of December?
Well, you're talking to a guy who thought they would be there last year. I think we do a draft on our show, the over-under draft, where we take like overs and unders, and they were one of my top picks, was taking the Giants over, so I was very wrong on that. But it was because of what I said, that they have some core foundational top-level talent, and then I like the lines. Whenever I look for a surprise team, I just look, all right, who's pretty good if you add up the offensive line and defensive line, if you made those rankings right now. And I think the Giants are still pretty high on that list. So, yes, to answer your question, I think they absolutely can be just in the mix. That's all I thought they would be last year, was an 8-9 win type of team. And I think they can, with the right moves, be that type of team this year for sure.
Are you a Dart believer, or does he still need to show you more?
More of a believer than I was. I was going into the draft, I was kind of like, I got to see it. And after this year, I feel like I saw it more than maybe conventional wisdom is even saying after this year. I was really impressed overall. I thought the game was not too fast for him. Obviously, there's things to improve on. He's an impressive kid. I spoke to him at the Super Bowl, but it's more about just his film. I thought it was really good for a rookie. And if you can do that as a rookie, you're only going to get better.
All right, Greg, tell the folks everything you're doing here with free agency, and you can just kick Daniel Jeremiah out of the curb. Put him in front of his college tape, get him out of here, let him watch, a bunch of 7th-round guys from, Norfolk State, and this is your time now.
This is my season, like my favorite 2 weeks of the season. Although we are taping our shows weekly with DJ, so that's 40s and free agents. But yeah, NFL Daily, it's in the name. So we're going to be live on the NFL channel on your TV, but also live on YouTube and just in your ears for podcasts every day, really, through free agency.
Greg, appreciate the time today, man. Thanks so much. This was fun.
Yeah, great talking to you.
We thank Gregg Rosenthal for joining us right here on the Giants Huddle podcast, presented by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. I am John Schmeelk, coming to you from the Hackensack Meridian Health Podcast Studio. Keep getting better. We'll see you next time, everybody.